What is your nobody will ever believe this year's story? Story 1. I once left my house in nothing but a t-shirt and sweatpants during a suicidal, manic-depressive episode. I bought a pack of cigarettes and told the universe that if it couldn't give me a good reason not to end my life by the time I finished the pack, I'd do it. I ended up seeing Daniel Radcliffe smoking a hand-rolled cigarette outside of a Starbucks. I offered him a real cigarette, pretending to have no idea who he was. "Oh, no, thank you," he said. "I much prefer the ritual of rolling my own." What I could have said was, "Yeah, that makes sense, seeing as how you're a wizard." What I did say was, "Hi, I'm PhDVA. What's your name?" Given my pact, and with nothing to lose, I unloaded all my emotional baggage on him right there. We ended up talking on the curb for half an hour. He asked me about my tattoos and listened to me recite Shakespeare. Eventually, he touched my shoulder, looked me in the eyes and said, "I know there's no good way to say this, but please don't hurt yourself." He asked me what reasons I had not to. "Well, my cat, my mom, my brother." "Right, well, I'm glad the cat came first." Totally charming. Finally, he announced that he was going to wander off that way. I had left my house without my phone due to the nature of my pact with the universe. Having nothing but the cigarettes on me to distract me from my pain was part of it, and made no attempt to follow him or get his number. I went back to that Starbucks several times over the coming weeks to no avail. I still don't regret not trying to give him my number, though. It would have violated the spirit of the pact. You can't get selfish with a gift from the universe like that. People with bipolar disorder may understand what I mean. In any case, acknowledging his fame or getting all stalkerish would have broken the spell. Story 2. I was lying in bed watching a movie and too lazy to move when I saw a small, harmless spider drop down from a thread on the ceiling, clearly heading toward the far side of my bed. Even if it wasn't venomous, I didn't want to share my bed with it, but I also didn't want to get up. Not thinking it would actually do anything, I reached out my arm toward it, still several feet away, and started waving my fingers at it in annoyance. To my absolute surprise, it immediately stopped its descent and actually retracted back up its thread while I just sat there in shock. It took me a few seconds to realize that my hand must have looked like the most giant spider it had ever seen, standing on its back legs and waving the front 5 in the back off or I'll destroy you dance. Story 3. My dog and I were on a walk on our local college campus one weekend when he nosed a lilac bush that was apparently full of butterflies. They all took off into the wind and then proceeded to do a perfect little spiral around me. I was so dumbfounded by them that I started spinning in circles trying to see them all, which probably contributed to the spiral. They were following the air currents created by my dress. Then it all culminated with them landing on my head like a crown, presumably because of the sweat. Butterflies are strange like that. My dog, by this time, was sitting nearby waiting for me to get over it and keep walking, looking majestic with his own little group of butterflies hovering around his face. It was already wild enough, but then I heard shuffling and a vague gasping sound. I looked just in time to see a guy walking by, a ways away, who had apparently tripped over his own feet from staring. From his perspective, it must have been surreal. I was wearing this fluffy, billowy red dress because I had just gotten back from church, and I always walked my dog barefoot to make sure I never took him on hot surfaces during the warm weather. My dog was this enormous, wolf-looking husky mix, and I had longish hair at the time. So for all he knew, he walked out of the library and saw a legit Disney princess in a cloud of butterflies with a giant wolf standing guard. It was the most ethereal and fancy I've ever felt. Even before I knew there was a witness, I mean a cloud of butterflies materialized from a lilac bush to form a living crown. It was breathtaking. Story 4. When I was a kid, around 10, I went to the library with my sister, 12, and my mom. My sister and I were doing the usual, walking up and down the rows of books, finding whatever caught our eye. Eventually, we split up. A while later, I found my mom and asked where my sister was. She hadn't seen her. So we started looking in the last area I saw her. Nothing. Another section, nothing. We went to the other side of the library. Still nothing. We checked the bathrooms outside the doors and did another lap around the library. Still nothing. We asked the staff if they had seen her. They hadn't, but they agreed to start looking. By this point, about 30 minutes had passed, and we were starting to panic. We continued searching every last corner of that library, and now we were shouting her name, and so were others. I'd say an hour into it, my stepdad was called. He was on his way and even stopped cars as they left the library parking lot. The entire time there were 15 plus people looking for her and calling her name. If she had been in that library, she would have heard us. My mom was at the front desk about to call the police when my sister came walking toward her from the kids section, completely unaware of what had happened. She said she had been sitting there reading a book about skateboarding the whole time. We asked how long she'd been there and she said, maybe 15 minutes. It had been over an hour since we saw her. I don't know what happened that day, but she absolutely was not in that library. We never went back. Story 5. My sister and I shared a room in high school and would get ready together most mornings without saying a word, since we were usually too tired to interact. I was sitting at the vanity one morning, and she was on the bed when I had a sudden urge to flick my scrunchie. All I said was, "Watch this," and released the hairband across the room. I don't know how to explain it, but the scrunchie went right around the post of the bed, which was a sphere the size of a large fist. When I tell you, logically, this should not have happened. We didn't even celebrate. All we could do was stare at each other, completely puzzled. The silence was then broken as our dad walked in. I can only imagine how insane we looked as we tried to explain to him what had just happened. Honestly, it's not that serious, and this is my first post, but I think about it a lot. Story 6. My friend and I were just sitting outside a 7-Eleven with some drinks and a packed pipe on St. Patrick's Day back in 2009 or 2008. We were pretty intoxicated when this Ford Explorer came tearing around the corner like a maniac. He sideswiped a whole row of parked cars, which tore off his bumper and a bunch of other parts from his vehicle. The guy stumbled out, picked up as much of the broken car as he could, tossed it in the back, got back in, and drove off. We were standing there completely stunned when less than a minute later a cop came speeding around the same corner. He asked if we saw what happened. We said yes. He asked if we could come with him to identify the driver. So we grabbed our drinks and the pipe and hopped into the back of the cruiser. I asked the officer if I could smoke a cigarette, and he said I could. Then I told him that due to my medical card, I was permitted to use cannabis anywhere I could smoke a cigarette. He just cracked the windows a bit as we sped down the main boulevard. We were still using the pipe and drinking the whole way. The Explorer was pulled over a few miles away. The cops stopped, and we all got out. Still holding the pipe, we gave our statements between puffs and sips. They confirmed our story since the guy had his bumper in the back, just like we said, and the paint transfer matched. The cop dropped us back off at the 7-Eleven, and at that point, we went back in to buy more drinks and repack the bowl. That was a wild night. Story 7. Back during my drug-using days, I was at a meth cook's house. He had just finished a batch a day or so before and decided to try it by injecting it. He did the injection, and about 3 seconds later, I heard screaming coming from the cook room. I stood up and ran over, and he was grabbing his arms and face, yelling loudly. He stood up and knocked over a burner, spilling some kind of liquid all over it, and it basically caused half the room to catch fire. He managed to move just enough to avoid being fully engulfed and only caught the area around his pants on fire. So I helped him get to the bathroom while 2 other guys worked on putting out the fire. Since he was a cook, he actually had multiple fire extinguishers in his setup. They were surprisingly effective. I got him into the shower and started running water all over him, but he kept saying he was on fire. All I could see were small amounts of blood coming from his eyes, nose, and palms. His leg was a little burned, but nothing extreme. He kept screaming that he was still on fire, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. It was hospital time. Turns out he had cut the meth poorly, and the mix had a lot of lye in it. It was seeping out through his pores, eyes, nose, mouth, and elsewhere. He spent almost a month in the hospital, then did a little over a year in jail. The fire department still showed up and saw everything. And after that, he got completely sober. He now works as off-the-books help for a caretaker at a local park. Story 8. When I was 8 years old and my sister was 7, we both had the same dream and ended up sleepwalking together in the night out into the middle of the road. Let me give you some backstory. Earlier that day, we had new neighbors move into the house behind us. They had 2 daughters around our age that we quickly made friends with. That night, my sister and I both dreamt we were running in a field full of sunflowers, picking them for our new friends. I felt so happy and carefree in the dream, and I could see my little sister running alongside me, also picking sunflowers. When we woke up, our mom and our neighbors were there, telling us that we had both been sleepwalking outside together, holding hands, and were about to walk into the middle of the street when our other neighbors, not the ones we had just met, who had just gotten home, spotted us. The wife ran to grab us, while the husband ran inside his house to get his gun before going into our house to check on my mom. Because we had left the front door wide open, they thought there might have been a break-in. Our mom is hard of hearing. She is completely deaf in one ear and only has about 15% hearing in her other ear. She wears a hearing aid but takes it off at night, which is why she never heard us leave. After we realized what had happened, we talked about everything and literally recalled all of the same details and remembered seeing each other in our dreams. It's now been 20 years, and we still remember everything the same and stick by our memories of that night. I'm just grateful to our neighbors. Who knows what might have happened if they didn't see us. Story 9. I was at a friend's off-grid cottage with our combined group of 16 dogs. It's a 1,200-acre property with over 2 kilometers of rough off-road driving to get to the cottage itself, and the cell reception is very poor. We were out hiking in the woods to deal with a problem beaver dam. It had diverted a river from draining into the lake and was flooding the road instead. The dam was absolutely massive, with a good 20-foot drop on one side. After working on it for a while, water finally started pouring through. That's when my friend realized her key fob was missing. Panic kicked in immediately. The only spare was over a 3-hour drive away. One of her dogs, who was up on the dam with us, stuck his head into the moving water and pulled out the key fob. Had we not both witnessed it, we never would have believed each other. And when we try to tell people what happened, even though we both describe it exactly the same way, it's still met with disbelief. Story 10. Tina Fey visits the town I live in every few years because her husband's family lives here. Just a tiny town in Ohio. I was in high school when I learned this because a few classmates worked at Dairy Queen and said she would come in almost every day during their visit. I mentioned this to my best friend, and my bestie told me that her grandmother is actually close friends with Tina Fey's in-laws. Another story is something that happened to one of my high school teachers in the mid-2000s. This teacher had an elective class that focused on studying song lyrics. He was really into music. Usually 10 students at most would take the class each semester. One semester they were analyzing lyrics from a John Mellencamp song. I can't remember which one since I heard this story 11 years ago. And they ended up writing John a letter saying how much they enjoyed his lyrics. To everyone's surprise, John contacted the school. He was doing a concert in a nearby city and came in the day before the show to visit the teacher and students. He gave them tickets for the concert, and they gave him a shirt with the school name and mascot on it. John wore the shirt during the entire concert. Story 11. I once had a Shih Tzu that really wanted to see out of the lower window of the front door. The door was in a mudroom, behind an interior door as well. One day I saw the dog running in circles in the living room. He'd pick up speed and ram the interior door. Eventually the laminate started cracking. I came home another day, opened the interior door, and the dog greeted me, fully soaked. I didn't think much of it and ran to check if he had jumped in the toilet. Everything looked dry. Then I looked at the carpet in the living room and saw wood pieces all over the floor from the interior door. I thought dogs didn't sweat from their skin, but I couldn't explain why the dog was wet after apparently working all day to destroy the door. He got reprimanded and the behavior stopped until I came home another day to a wet dog. I checked the floor, no wood. Checked the bathroom, it was fine. I closed the door and saw more destruction, at which point I noticed the carpet wasn't laying flat. I lifted it and found wood pieces from the door hidden underneath. He moved the carpet, destroyed more of the door, then put the carpet back. He got reprimanded again, but a few days later he greeted me at the front door window. An entire foot of the bottom of the door had been systematically destroyed, and now he was satisfied. Story 12. I have a few stories, but this one gets the most eye rolls because of its religious nature. I was kayaking with my mom, a couple of siblings, and a family friend who's a Catholic priest. Father got caught in a fallen tree in a particularly swift part of the river and capsized. After he resurfaced, he quickly exclaimed that he lost his glasses. We all got out of our kayaks and started searching. Not the best idea because of the current, but he was nearly blind without them. We searched for a solid 15 to 20 minutes with no success. We figured the glasses were hundreds of feet downriver by then, lost for good. Father sighed and said that before giving up, we should ask for St. Anthony's help, as he's the patron saint of lost things. We stood no more than 20 feet downriver of where Father capsized and prayed for St. Anthony's intercession. When we said amen, my mom got a shocked look on her face. She bent under the water and picked up the glasses. She said she felt them tap against her foot right as we ended the prayer. People rarely believe me when I tell this one. Many confidently say my mom had the glasses the whole time. She didn't. Believe me, she wanted out of that cold Michigan river as much as the rest of us did. There was no reason for her to be hiding them. Story 13. I work for an airline, and like all other passengers, we are not allowed to bring raw meat into the country. If you get caught smuggling, it's an official warning plus a note in your file. A second time means losing your job. One time I flew back from Brazil carrying a beautiful 1.5 kilo picana and 1.5 kilos of alcatra beef for a nice BBQ. When we arrived at the airport, customs were waiting for us at the crew checkpoint. I wasn't the only one carrying beef. I had stuffed mine into my carry-on suitcase, while the co-pilot had his beef in his flight bag. The co-pilot walked up to the customs officer who asked, "Do you have anything to declare?" Stone cold, the co-pilot told him, "No. Please put your suitcase in the x-ray, sir." The co-pilot put his suitcase through but held on to his flight bag. He walked around the machine, picked up his suitcase, thanked the officer, and walked on. He didn't get caught because he didn't put his flight bag in the machine. Then it was my turn. "Where did you come from, and do you have anything to declare, sir?" "I arrived from Sao Paulo and have nothing to declare." "Okay, please put your luggage in the machine." At that point, I thought I could get away with it too. The co-pilot didn't scan his flight bag, so maybe I wouldn't have to scan my carry-on either. I put my suitcase in the machine and started to walk around it. "Sir, did your carry-on come from another destination?" "No?" "Then put it in the machine as well." I knew I was in trouble. 3 kilos of beef smuggled into the country. That would be an official reprimand and a note on my file. It was too late to confess. I placed my carry-on in the machine and walked around to where the officer was watching the screen. I waited to see the beef appear and get caught. At that moment, I heard the sound of a bottle cap being opened. Once, twice, 3 times. The officer reached into his pocket and opened WhatsApp. Just as my bag crossed the screen, clearly showing the beef, he opened a video and didn't even look up. He laughed and said, "You're good. Have a nice day." I took my bags and walked slowly until I turned the corner, then half ran into the crew area, quickly said goodbye to everyone, and went home. It was the best BBQ beef I have ever had in my life. Story 14. My husband and I went away for a long weekend, fishing, camping, spending time on the boat. We kept the boat at my parents' farm because they had a big shed. On Monday, I realized I had lost my wedding ring. It could have been anywhere. I looked for it, but eventually accepted that it was gone forever and claimed insurance on it. Despite that, my mother insisted the ring would come back to me, and that my husband would be the one to find it. I thought she was being overly optimistic. Fast forward about 8 months. The boat had been moved to a different shed, so my dad could use the original one for the tractor. My husband was helping him with a tractor task when he came running into the house, got down on one knee, and presented me with my ring. It turns out I had lost it while cleaning the boat, and it had fallen into the mud, totally invisible. After months of the tractor running over it again and again, it finally reappeared. On the very day my husband happened to be there, just as my mother predicted. Story 15. I once snuck out in high school. We had those doors that set off alarms when opened in security mode, so I had to sneak out through the basement window. It was an old crank-style window that required removing the screen, and I had to leave it open while I was out so I could close it from the inside when I returned. I got out and made it to my getaway car when I realized I forgot my wallet. Essential. I turned around for a quick in and out at the house I had just snuck out of 5 minutes earlier. As I was walking around the back, the upstairs living room light turned on, and I heard my parents moving around. I panicked, rushed inside, got the window closed, hid the screen, and snuck up the back staircase to my room. My bed was clearly messed up and the light was on, so I pretended to be asleep in my closet, hoping they hadn't already checked there. Story 16. I was driving home one day in my 1991 Ford Bronco. This was in 2016, so the truck was already pretty old. It broke down, but I managed to coast to the side of the road. I had just started my career as a mechanic at the time. I was 21. I opened the hood to see if anything obvious was wrong. An older gentleman approached and asked if I was okay. I told him I was fine, just broke down. He told me it was his house I had stopped in front of and that he used to be a Ford mechanic. He said he had fond memories working on Broncos like mine. He mentioned it was likely the ignition control module, which often fails on those trucks. I said I'd be surprised. It had just been replaced. We checked fuel pressure and other things, but he still believed it was the ignition module. Then he said, "Hold on," disappeared for about 10 to 15 minutes and came back holding one in his hand. I couldn't believe it. We installed it, and the truck started right up. I had broken down in front of a retired Ford mechanic who had the exact part I needed for my exact engine. I offered to pay him since the part costs a few $100s at the dealer, but he said, absolutely not. He told me, "Do you know how many times I've picked that thing up and thought about throwing it away?" Then said, "Hey, I'll hang on to it." I think it was just for this occasion. It was the most unbelievable thing that's ever happened to me. That module stayed in my truck the entire time I owned it. Story 17. A few friends and I were being chased by what we think were undercover officers. They wore plain clothes and didn't come from a police car, but they yelled police. It was late at night and we had been knocking on doors for fun. We ran through a park to escape, but they stayed about 20 meters behind us the entire time. We cut through a gap between houses and onto a street. I was about 5 meters ahead of my friends, so I didn't see them duck behind a house. I ran about 4 houses farther but was completely out of breath. I hid behind a car in someone's front yard. 10 seconds later, the two guys walked past saying things like, "Wow, they really thought we were cops," probably to lure us out. They reached the end of the dead-end street, turned around, and walked past me, just as a police car came around the corner with a flashlight out the window. The two guys jumped into the yard beside me and lay on the ground behind a bush. I could clearly see them. The police car drove slowly down the street, then left. I foolishly stood up about 10 seconds later and said, "Wow, you guys tricked us," thinking they were just messing with us. But when I looked into the yard next to me, they were gone. I was talking loudly, so if they were still nearby, they would have heard me. I had definitely seen them hiding. They hadn't jumped into the police car. I would have heard doors and the car never slowed to a stop. They couldn't have run behind the house either, since I would have seen them. I searched the street for 5 minutes, but my friends had already jumped a back fence and thought I had done the same. Then 5 minutes later, I heard voices. It was the two guys walking down the same street the police car had just come from, 150 meters away. I stood in the dark, stunned. I had assumed they had escaped back through the park, but here they were walking casually the opposite way. It made no sense. They passed by me, just laughing, saying nothing about what had just happened. I told my friends about it later, but they just said, "Wow, that's crazy." I know it sounds bizarre, but I still can't explain how they disappeared and reappeared like that. Story 18. Probably late here, but I have a few stories. I've always been surrounded by famous people from my country. One well-known athlete lives on my street. They have a lovely dog and are incredibly kind. Also, another guy on the same street has the same name as our president. I've never seen him, but the house looks expensive and has security cameras everywhere. So who knows? My mom is good friends with a famous skier because when his wife was giving birth, they were in the same room as my mom, who was giving birth to me. My dad's high school friends formed a band that's pretty well known in our country. I see them a couple of times a year when they go out drinking with my dad. He also knows many other famous people because he's a plumber and has a lot of contacts. I remember when I was little, I used to draw a lot, and my dad was so proud of me that he would show my drawings to these famous politicians and athletes, even though they were just childish scribbles. Huge confidence boost, though. Also, about 2 years ago, we formed a band. I'm the bassist. And on New Year's Eve, we wanted to play our first gig. We invited 2 good friends, but around 8 other people showed up, mostly our parents. One of them was a guy we didn't know, and it turns out he was a singer and music producer. Story 19. This one time, my mom was about to go get groceries on her bicycle, and just as she was about to leave, she realized she had forgotten the cloth bag she always uses to carry everything. So she shouted at me to go get it for her. I stepped outside and, seeing that she was already out there, I didn't feel like getting the fence keys. I rolled the bag into a ball and, from about 5 meters away, tossed it to her, expecting she'd catch it. But no, this bag was something else. It extended midair like it had a wingsuit and 20 years of training. It flew right over our 2-meter-tall metal fence, And since my mom had her bicycle resting against it, I was sure I'd overshot. But no again. The bag did a backflip in midair, and avoiding my mom's attempt to catch it, went straight for the bicycle. At this point, everyone had already scattered. We were convinced the bag was being piloted by some unknown entity on a mission. I, knowing running was pointless, stayed behind. As the bag finished its backflip, it landed exactly where it needed to be. With the grace of a gazelle, it hooked itself onto the bicycle handlebar and just hung there, staring at me. No disasters occurred that day because the bag thankfully found mercy. Story 20. I woke my twin up from a coma when we were 3. We're fraternal twins. It was a last resort attempt by the doctors before deciding whether to pull the plug. They taped a landline phone to his head and called my mom. My dad was at the hospital with my twin, and my mom was in a completely different city at home, taking care of me and our older brother. Every single time his or my life has been in danger, the other twin has known instantly. Fraternal twins aren't supposed to have that connection, especially not girl-boy twins, and definitely not when one is severely disabled. But we communicated before we could speak. We still understand each other on a deeper level than anyone else. I woke him from a deep coma, and to this day, we instantly sense if something's wrong with the other. It's comforting and exhausting all at once. Even as adults living separate lives, we remain as close as ever. There are more stories people find hard to believe, but this one is the ultimate. People always ask our parents for proof. We've just lived a very different life from most people, despite being regular folks. Story 21. A few years ago, I went on a road trip through Norway with 2 of my friends when we stumbled upon 2 huge random caves carved into the cliffs right by the road, completely in the middle of nowhere. They looked like unfinished tunnels made for cars or something. In the first tunnel, there were rows of abandoned cars lined up as far as we could see, disappearing into complete darkness. Naturally, my friends decided to explore. They filmed the whole thing, and I swear it's perfect horror movie material. They found matches, opened the trunk of one car, and joked about it being the one vehicle without something or someone creepy inside. In the second tunnel, we found an old caravan with clothes and shoes scattered everywhere. My friends even started picking which ones they'd take home. The clothes didn't look too old, so they couldn't have been there for too long. When we got back to our car, a truck had parked nearby, and a man came out taking pictures of our vehicle. He said the caves were his and that people used to litter all over them. Funny how he happened to stop by at that exact moment. We left pretty quickly after that. A few minutes down the road, we stopped and asked each other, did that really just happen? I hadn't followed my friends deep into the tunnels. I was too scared. And honestly, if this had turned into a horror movie, I would have been the one girl who escaped to tell the story that no one would believe. Oh, and did I mention? It was raining the entire time. Story 22. I was once on a bus ride that ended up having so many wild things happen that I was glad my friend was with me. Otherwise, nobody would have believed it. First, there was George, a middle-aged man with what looked like a brand new mail-order wife. He was trying to be all lovey-dovey, and she was initially kind of okay with it. But eventually, she just tried to mind her own business. The bus was nearly full when we left the terminal. At the first stop, a few people got on and filled the remaining seats, including one super drunk guy sitting about 3 rows in front of us. At the second stop, a small group of girls got on. They must have been out celebrating someone's birthday. They'd clearly had a few drinks, but were not as intoxicated as the drunk guy. All the seats were taken, so they stood. Eventually, one of them asked George if she could sit or lean on the armrest of his seat. George replied, "You can sit on my lap instead," like a total creep, and the drunk girl actually sat on his lap. Then a woman near the front of the bus started yelling, "Oh my gosh, that's disgusting. Are you serious? And you're not even going to say anything?" This was directed at the super drunk guy who had just had some sort of burp, vomit, cough incident and spattered bits on the woman across from him, on her arm, in her hair, and on her book. She stormed off at the next stop. Meanwhile, George was now chatting with the drunk girl on his lap. He wasn't overtly inappropriate, but he was definitely being creepy. "No, really? Then you're about the same age as my daughter." She was tipsy enough to go along with it. A few stops later, the drunk girls and the super drunk guy got off the bus. George then tried to get affectionate with his wife, date, who said no and stopped multiple times. A man behind us spoke up. "She said no, buddy. Leave her alone." George started cursing at him. Things got tense. At the next stop, George and his date were about to leave, and women around the bus stood up, urging her not to go with him since he clearly wasn't respecting her boundaries. More shouting followed. George tried to square up to a younger, very muscular guy. A fight nearly broke out, and George ended up getting shoved right into my friend's lap. He had the aisle seat. My friend calmly held George down with his arm like a seatbelt and said, "How about we all just relax a bit?" The bus driver started yelling, and George's date got off the bus without him. George stayed in his seat, cussing and fuming, and almost got into another fight before finally settling down. About 20 minutes later, in a much calmer tone, he said, "You know, I appreciate what you guys did without knowing the full story. I'd hope if my daughter were in a situation like that, someone would step up and try to keep her safe." A few people started criticizing him again, but we reminded them that it's okay to reflect and change. He got off at the next stop. We spent the next 10 minutes just sitting in disbelief at the story we'd have to tell. Story 23. When I was 18, I walked outside my house and found hundreds of crows everywhere. In the trees, on the car, on the power lines, the porch, the roof, absolutely everywhere. They all stared at me in complete silence until the largest crow I have ever seen landed right in front of me and cawed. Slowly, the others began quietly cawing among themselves until he cawed again. I just went about my business and headed to the store. A few members of the flock followed me. When I got back, the large one and several others were still there, staring at me slightly until I went inside. Ever since that day, crows follow me around from time to time, always led by that one enormous crow. I have no idea what meeting I interrupted or what I was chosen for, or even what they said. But even now at 26, the one I've dubbed the King of Crows still follows me. And even when I point him out to others, they refuse to believe me. Story 24. This is weird, but my friend's big sister tried to drown me when I was about 10. Me, my friend, and her sister were swimming in a big lake while their mom was watching us. There were about 8 to 10 other people swimming nearby too. I was playing with my friend when her sister suddenly came up to me and, for no reason, grabbed my head and pushed me underwater. She held me there for about 20 seconds and I started to panic. Then she just let me go and swam away. I don't understand how no one saw what happened. My friend never mentioned it, her mom didn't notice anything, and neither did any of the others nearby. I was too scared to tell anyone because no one had said anything, and I'd never experienced something that terrifying before. About a year later, during another summer, we were going swimming again, but I stayed on the beach. When asked why, I said I wasn't going in if her sister was there, because last summer she tried to drown me. Everyone, including the sister, looked completely confused. No one believed me, and the sister genuinely didn't seem to remember it at all. Story 25. Dumb fishing stories, but one day I went out and caught 2 fish in the strangest ways. The first fish swallowed a spinner at just the right depth to bite down on the snap swivel. The swivel ended up hooking the fish in the lip, and I brought it in that way. No clue how or why it happened, but the spinner came off the snap swivel completely, yet the fish stayed on. Had a heck of a time getting the spinner back. An hour or so later, I was using a popper and hooked a fish. It was fighting really well until it jumped, and suddenly my line got incredibly heavy. Turns out, when it jumped, its tail caught the second hook set, so the fish was hooked in both the mouth and the tail. Came in looking like a donut. I was terrified to unhook it, thinking it would start thrashing the second it got free. But nope, it just uncurled itself calmly and let me unhook it. Then it swam off like nothing ever happened. I've never had anything like that happen before or since, and both on the same trip. Story 26. Okay, this story actually happened. Every Tuesday, I think, my class would go to a public sports facility. It was pretty big. It had a pool and a handball court where we do PE. I really didn't like going there, especially on pool days the year before. Random side note, but it had a giant water slide, because I didn't like going into the showers and seeing grown men naked. Anyway, one day after regular training, my best friend and I were the last ones still getting changed into our normal clothes. The changing room was connected to another one. That will be important later. We had keys to lock up the changing room, return them to a staff member, and then go home. Seemed easy enough. We were talking about ghosts, and the room was completely silent. Then suddenly, the door to the other changing room violently slammed open and shut with a loud bang. We immediately ran out of the room. I started sprinting while my friend locked the door behind us. My heart was pounding. My friend explained to the worker that someone had slammed the door, so we went back to the changing room with the staff member, and no one was there. If someone had been there, we would have heard or seen them running, but we didn't. We went home totally freaked out. It couldn't have been the wind. There were no windows in that room. My friend still insists it was just a draft, but the thought still haunts me to this day. Story 27. About 20 years ago, two friends and I missed the bus to school, so we decided to hitchhike. Our school was about 30 minutes away, and we lived in Hawaii, where it was generally pretty safe to do that. A guy clearly under the influence was driving in the opposite direction. He pulled over across the road and asked where we were going. We told him, and he said he could take us. Without checking traffic, he tried to do a U-turn across the road and slammed into another car. The woman in the other car hit her head on the windshield and was bleeding everywhere. The guy who wasn't wearing a seatbelt flew out of the car like a rag doll. Whatever he was on must have been powerful because he jumped back up, got into the car, which now had a gas leak and one wheel almost sideways, and moved it off the road as we screamed that he was going to blow himself up. Then, as if nothing had happened, he reached into the back seat, pulled out a brown paper bag, took out a bento, Hawaiian-style lunchbox, and started eating. The police arrived, we explained everything, and another friend on her way to school saw us and picked us up. We spent the rest of the day telling the entire high school what had happened that morning. Story 28. A few years ago, I studied abroad and did the whole backpacking through Europe thing. I was on a tight budget, so I tried to save money by skipping hotels and sleeping on trains. On my way to Rome, I decided to sleep at a train station in a town in northern Italy. But I was under the impression that you weren't allowed to stay in the station overnight, so I got locked out. I ended up squatting in some bushes outside the station for 6 hours until my next train. Then this tall guy showed up and asked if he could sit with me. He told me there was a group of guys on the other side of the station who looked like they were up to no good. On our side of the station, car after car pulled up and women would get in, if you catch my drift. Eventually, I found out that the guy sitting with me was border hopping. He didn't have any papers and was trying to get to Germany without being stopped. We parted ways when my train arrived first thing in the morning. He asked me to add him on Facebook, but I couldn't remember his name. Sometimes I wonder what happened to him. Story 29. I was born to an abusive father and a narcissistic mother. My father abandoned us, and my mother remarried. My first memories are of my stepbrother's funeral. He drowned in a neighbor's pool. I was adopted by my stepfather. I've survived 3 house fires. As an adult, one of my roommates caught another using my PC to download illegal material. When the offender was caught, he went to the police and claimed he had just found it. The legal battle lasted over a year and cost me my career and my significant other at the time. Even after I was exonerated, I was still treated with intense stigma and had to move back in with my parents. The person who actually did it was never investigated because he had family in local government and law enforcement. Everything was swept under the rug. I've been stalked twice in my life by different people. I met a woman online who eventually became my wife. I moved 3,500 miles from home to be with her, and now we have a 2-year-old together. Less than 3 years after moving to a new continent, my dad was diagnosed with leukemia and stage 4 bone cancer. My narcissistic mother has spent the past few months he's been in treatment, complaining about how it affects her Caribbean cruises and casino trips. This paragraph is just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more, and I'm only 34, so there's still more to come. Yay. Story 30. My wife and I drove through a rainbow in Oregon about 6 years ago. I know. According to science, that's not possible, except it happened. And before anyone suggests it, yes, we were in Oregon. But no, there were no substances involved, LOL. We were on the freeway with several other cars just after it rained. In the distance, we could see a rainbow. It looked like it was getting closer, not in an unusual way, just noticeably. As we got even closer, the outline of the bow began to fade. Suddenly, and only for a second, we saw subtle hues of the color spectrum right in front of the car, stretched across the highway. My wife and I looked at each other like, wait, did that just happen? We were excited and confused, even texting a friend about it. But a few minutes later, we kind of forgot it and continued driving. A few days later, we told some friends, and they were adamant that what we thought we saw was physically impossible. They explained how the science of rainbows works and why you can't get near or through one. Still, we knew what we saw. I did question whether our senses fooled us. Maybe it was just a rare optical illusion caused by sunlight angles in our wet windshield. Who knows? But the feeling never left me. I even searched online and found one video that closely resembled what we experienced. Story 31. Really lame, but this is my story. Back in college, I worked as a resident assistant. We kept some petty cash at the front desk to make change for residents or buy small office items. I worked the front desk until midnight one night and then again at 8 a.m. the next day. A resident I didn't know needed change that night, so I exchanged her $20 bill. Knowing we'd need to break that bill later, I went to retrieve it the next morning when everything opened. It was gone. I immediately called the director and said, "Hey, $20 is missing from petty cash." She sounded suspicious, which made sense, considering 7 people had office keys. I had done my part by reporting it and didn't give it much more thought. It wasn't my job to investigate the staff, but a couple weeks later, we were all called into a meeting with the head of campus housing. He gave a vague speech about how the college values honesty and integrity, and then brought up the theft. Everyone on staff turned to look at me. I realized he wasn't speaking to everyone. He was speaking directly to me. Somehow, everyone assumed I had stolen the money because I was the one who reported it. They started offering evidence, like she needs it more than we do, or she borrowed quarters for laundry once and didn't pay it back, or even, how else would she have known exactly how much was missing? I was shocked and hurt. No matter what I said or did, they didn't believe me. Nothing official came from it beyond that meeting, but it was more than enough. It's been 17 years and I'm still bitter about it. Story 32. If you don't know, hermit crabs love walking in water and keeping it in their shells. No matter how clean you set up their tank, they'll almost always dirty the water, so it needs regular changing. One morning I noticed one of the hermit crabs had climbed to the top of the tallest piece of decor in the tank. It was facing us in the apartment and waving one claw back and forth. I had never seen this kind of behavior before, so I watched for a while. The crab just kept waving the claw back and forth. Eventually I got closer to see what was going on. I didn't notice anything above the crab that might have caught its attention, but I did notice the water was dirty. I had just replaced it, so one of them probably wanted a fresh dip. I kind of forgot about the claw waving and replaced the water again. Sometime later, I saw the same behavior. Based on the shell, I'm pretty sure it was the same crab, up high, facing us from the tank and waving. I went to check again and got distracted by an overturned bowl, but I started noticing a pattern. I eventually started calling this one the senator. Every now and then, they'd climb up and wave that claw at us, and we'd discover something was wrong in the tank. It turned out to be really helpful, because no matter how careful you are, pets make messes. The senator was always on top of things. I also like to think about how weird it must have been for the crab, just stress dancing away, and suddenly a big hand swoops in to fix everything. Story 33. Many years ago, 2 of my friends and I were hanging out at the mall, trying to figure out a way to get a ride a few towns over to buy weed. A kid a few years younger than us, who followed us around and hung out with us, chimed in and said, "I can get my grandmother to take us." At first, this obviously sounded like a ridiculous idea. Get this kid's grandmother to drive us to, well, a part of town where one could easily buy weed from someone standing in front of a house. But the idea sounded so absurd that it became hilarious. So I led the charge and said, "Heck yeah, give her a call." He used the payphone and called her up, asking if she could bring us to pick up a friend a few towns over. A few minutes later, this sweet old woman, probably in her 70s, pulled up in an early 80s import station wagon. The 4 of us piled in. The kid sat up front with Grandma, and the 3 of us crammed into the back seat. My friend Bob started giving directions. Along the way, the kid up front was telling Grandma a story about how our friend had just flown back into town and needed a ride to the mall. The whole trip, we were trying not to laugh at how surreal the situation felt. As we pulled into Weed Town and drove down the street, Bob rolled down the window and called out to a group of people standing in front of a house. "Weed?" They said, "No, man, down the street." So Bob told Grandma it was a few houses further down. The kid then chimed in with, "We call him Weed because one time he gave his girlfriend flowers, but they were just a bunch of weeds. So that's how he got the nickname." Right after he said that, Bob called out to the next group of people, Weed. They responded, "Yeah, I got you." Bob said, "Stop here. I'll go get him." He jumped out of the car, bought the weed, and came back saying, "Oh man, he already got a ride to the mall. He's back there waiting for us." The kid apologized to Grandma. "Sorry, Grandma, can you bring us back to the mall?" She happily agreed, and off we went. We got back to the mall and got high. I've told this story a million times, and I'm not sure anyone believes it, but I swear, it's 100% true. Story 34. I worked a boring data entry temp job at a car recycling plant. They crushed old cars for about a week. I had to create digital records of their old handwritten forms, going through massive piles and manually typing in names and numbers. By day 4, I was going absolutely crazy from boredom and started writing a horror story about a kid who worked at a car recycling plant. He finds a death certificate mixed in with the records and eventually realizes the warehouse where the cars are dumped is actually housing a giant monster that eats the vehicles and the bodies inside them. Anyway, no joke, one day after I started writing that story, I found a death certificate mixed in with the recycling records. I just stared at it thinking, this can't be real. But it was, right there in my hands. I still have it at home, in my old room at my mom's house. The next day, I walked out of that job a couple of hours early because I couldn't take the data entry anymore. I was 17 and didn't really care. Later, I got a call from the temp agency saying I was fired, so I never found out if there really was a monster in that warehouse or not. Story 35. Okay, this is going to sound crazy, and before I tell it, let me clarify that I was 100% sober when it happened. A couple of years ago, I went to pick up a friend because we had plans to hang out. When I got to her house, I had to walk past her kitchen window to get to the front door. As I walked past, I looked inside and saw her mom. Her hair was wet, and she was wearing a green sweater. This part is important. We made eye contact, and she gave me a head nod like, "What's up?" I nodded back. She then started walking toward the front door. There are these little side windows next to the front door, so I peeked through them, expecting her to open the door, but she just walked right by. I thought that was odd, so I went back to the kitchen window. And now my friend was there, even though she hadn't been before. I waved to her, got her attention, and she came to open the door. We chatted briefly, and her mom came over to say hi, still with wet hair and still wearing that same green sweater. I said, "Hey, I saw you walk by the door. I thought you were going to open it, but you just walked past." She looked confused and said, "What are you talking about?" "I just got out of the shower. I've been in the bathroom for the past 15 minutes, which is on the left of the front door, so she would have had to pass it." I responded, "What do you mean?" We just saw each other through the kitchen window. We locked eyes and nodded. My friend said, "I was the only one in the kitchen. No one else has come in or out." I thought they were messing with me, but they were dead serious, and they're not the type to carry on a prank like that. I've never been so confused in my life. And I know I didn't imagine it. How could I have perfectly imagined her wet hair and the exact sweater she ended up wearing? She still thinks my brain tricked me, but I know what I saw. It was way too real and clear. I'm convinced it was a glitch in the Matrix. Story 36. I'm a happily married man now. But back in high school, I was a solid 4 out of 10 nerd. This story comes from my high school perspective, not my married man perspective. Anyway, this one mostly popular girl was having a graduation party at a drive-in movie theater and invited me, along with most of the graduating class. She was pretty popular, especially in the band scene. She was on color guard and easily an 8+. Her friends were in the same hotness range. I barely knew her, but we had calculus together, and I'd only been invited to like 3 graduation parties total. So I went. Only about 5 people showed up, which was kind of crazy considering how popular she was. Maybe someone else more popular was throwing a party the same night. I'll never know. The 6 of us didn't fit super comfortably in a single truck, but we did fit perfectly in my minivan, which I had cleared out and filled with beanbag chairs. So there I am, in the back of the minivan, me, 1 other guy, and 5 girls. And these girls are basically lying on me, snuggled up, because it's a minivan. We saw 2 movies back to back, and I spent the whole time basically spooning multiple girls talking and laughing. It was wild, but that was just the start. Somehow this party evolved into the popular girl, we'll call her Angie, inviting everyone back to her house. I was like, it's 1 a.m., but my parents didn't give me a curfew. I'm in. No curfew because I was too straight-laced to ever do anything bad. I once got stopped by the police at 2 a.m. for writing positive messages in chalk at the park. At Angie's house, we all ended up in the basement. We were tired, so we all went to sleep downstairs. The other guy and the girl he was into were on the floor. I was on the futon with 3 girls. I was playing with one girl's hair and trying, as best as nerdy me could, to flirt. Next thing I knew, this 8'10" babe had her tongue down my throat. We were making out. It was wild. I went from never having been kissed to making out with a color guard girl on a bed with her best friend lying next to us. After what felt like forever, we stopped, and I was in a total haze. First kiss. Check. Then I realized, wait, Angie is literally on my other side. What do? I sheepishly rolled over to see her reaction, and she was all smiles like, "Nice work, champ." I was stunned. She wasn't mad. Then we started making out. Angie was way more intense than her BFF. Tongue, hands on my chest, guiding my hands to hers. Over clothes, but I pulled away quickly because I was a good Christian kid. She was really into it. We stopped, and I just lay there on my back in total bliss. Not only did I have my first kiss, I also had my second, with 2 gorgeous girls I barely knew. The dust settled, my mind cleared, and I realized what had happened. Earlier in the night, I'd admitted that I'd never been kissed. These clever women had decided to help me out. I was 2 for 3, and then I mentioned I should probably get going. It was 3 a.m. at that point. Girl number 3 offered to walk me to my car. At the car, she looked me in the eyes and asked if I was going to kiss her. So we kissed. Number 3 was the weakest kiss of the night, but still. Story 37. I woke up one morning in the summer, got up, went to the bathroom, and came back to get back into bed. When I pulled the sheets back, there was a bumblebee wrapped in them, exactly where I had been laying just minutes before. He couldn't have flown there while I was in the bathroom. The rooms are attached with no door. I would have heard him buzzing around. So B-movie me, I had just slept with a bumblebee. He was carefully removed and released. Alternatively, about 4 months ago, I bought a new bed and had it delivered. I was super excited because my old bed was all springs and way overdue for an upgrade. I popped a Benadryl and prepared to sleep for 15 hours straight. At 2 a.m., I heard what sounded like a giant boot stepping on a leaf. It woke me out of a dead sleep. I rolled over, turned on the little lamp next to my bed, and looked down at the ground. And right there, staring back at me, was a frog. Roughly the size of a computer mouse, a fairly good-sized lad. Now again, I was on an allergy pill, so I grabbed my phone and made a Snapchat video because I was thinking, this cannot be happening. The frog sat very nicely for the video. I still have it on my phone. The instant I stood up, he hopped under my bed. What followed was an hour-long game of cat and mouse with a very clever frog until I finally trapped him under a bowl. I then had to carry him through several closed doors in my shared house with no pants and no shoes on to let him outside. It was torrentially raining. I got completely soaked head to toe. And then, as I stepped back inside, I slipped on the tile floor by the front door and sprained my knee. Story 38. For decades, people have accidentally called me Josh. This is nowhere close to my real name. From people I've just met to teachers, friends, co-workers, and even family members. It started happening when I was a teenager and was most frequent in my 20s and early 30s. Now it only happens once every month or 2. When we were first married, my wife didn't believe me until she saw it happen several times. Sometimes the person catches it and says something like, "Why did I just call you that?" But more often, they don't even notice. What's really funny is when a professor would call on me as Josh, and my friends would notice, but the professor just kept talking like nothing was wrong. But the absolute best was when I got a phone call from someone in the financial aid office when I was in grad school. The guy asked for Josh, and I just said, "Wrong number," and hung up. My wife asked who they were looking for, and when I said Josh, she told me to call them back because they were clearly trying to reach me. I called back, explained that I had just received a call from that number, but they'd asked for the wrong name. The guy in the financial aid office was very confused and told me he had my paperwork on the desk right in front of him, with my actual name printed on it, and had no idea why he had called me Josh. Story 39. In high school, I went for a run with a guy I was training Kung Fu with. In retrospect, I don't think our instructor was qualified. This was a vaguely Appalachian area but not deep in the woods. We ran down this little side street and ended up on a dead-end road. We jogged to the end, where the last house had a chain-link fence, and somehow the gate wasn't secured. About 8 to 12 chihuahuas came barreling out of the yard, headed straight for our ankles. You know those scenes where Jackie Chan's uncle makes him jump over all the pots and crockery, knocking them over while moving through them? Yeah, valid training. We added it to our routine immediately afterward. Fortunately, the owner came out quickly and got the dogs back under control before there were any injuries to man, beast, or aspiring kung fu demigod. Later, we stopped at McDonald's. Walking back with a giant soda, we were still laughing about the whole thing. I laughed so hard while sipping that I choked and vomited my entire value meal right there on the main street, just as a red convertible drove by full of the most popular girls in school. So, I lost my dignity that day. Story 40. In 1999, Flea from the band Red Hot Chili Peppers held my girlfriend's hair while she vomited on a sidewalk, then signed her chest. My girlfriend and I had gotten drunk one night and somehow ended up walking through a random neighborhood in Daytona Beach, Florida. The area was quiet, no cars or people around, when suddenly a van pulled past us and parked about 20 feet ahead. Two guys stepped out and came over, saying they were with the Red Hot Chili Peppers and were lost. We had no idea where we were either, so we couldn't help. But when one of them saw my girlfriend getting ready to throw up, he quickly grabbed her hair and held it back while she did. I wasn't a huge fan or anything, but for some reason, I got super excited. I pulled out a marker and asked one of them for an autograph. My girlfriend, apparently feeling better and recognizing my excitement, noticed I didn't have anything for him to sign, so she pulled up her shirt. Flea took the marker and signed her chest. Then they hopped back into the van and drove away. People often tell me I was drunk and probably got fooled by random guys pretending to be the Chili Peppers, but I've looked at pictures of Flea since then, and I immediately recognized him. I know what I saw. Story 41. One time, my friends and I, just like a real-life mystery crew, stumbled upon a remote underground military base in Arizona while looking for a spot to have a fire and chill in the desert. We were just messing around when suddenly someone said, there's a booth? I took one look, and coming from a military family, I knew immediately we were somewhere we absolutely should not be. The signs read things like DEF-CON 4 and Terror Threat Orange, and we were already too far in. Turning back would have seemed even more suspicious. The soldier in the booth looked shocked and, understandably, extremely suspicious. He happened to be from the same city in Washington as us, which he thought was part of some elaborate ruse. We had a flat tire, I still wonder if that was really an accident, and needed to use a phone to call a local friend's dad. The soldier backed into the booth, picked up the phone, said something, then brought her in to use the phone. When he realized he'd have to give directions to her dad, he brought her back out, called again, presumably for permission to share coordinates, then brought her back in. She made the call again, and he walked her out. This whole time, he had an M16 trained on us. We stood outside the van in a line, most of us anyway. One guy refused to come out, which I still say is a terrible idea. Only someone hiding something stays hidden, and it looked bad. We made awkward small talk, trying to appear very much not like a threat. We were super hippies, by the way. After about an hour, our friend's dad finally arrived, clearly angry, and gave us all a full-on scolding while fixing the tire. The soldier seemed to appreciate that. He told us to load up and instructed her dad, "Go back the way you came, stop at the T." We followed them, and as we reached the T junction, two Humvees, one in front and one behind, suddenly lit up and pulled in around us. We must have driven right past them on our way in. They led us for a while before the lead Humvee pulled off and pointed us toward the highway. We waved apologetically and headed straight back to our friend's parents' house, where we laughed for hours. Now, whenever anyone says, "You're going to end up on some kind of list," I just nod and think, pretty sure I already am.